Welcome everybody to another episode of Hidden Truth Seventh Day. Um, we are still in the book of Job, and if I was doing my job right, this banner would already be up, but I did not do my job right, so it's just now getting up. But it's up. So we're in 13. 7144. Go ahead, take us there.
Okay, so Job chapter 14. So here Job reiterates that he understands what his friends are basically saying. Job wants to reason with God. So Job calls his friends forgers of lies and useless physicians. Job tells them to be quiet and listen, and that would be their wisdom. And then so dropping down, Job tries to convince them not to speak for God and not to be partial or a respecter of persons. We understand that God is not a respecter of persons. Um, then moving down, okay, so then we get a highlight verse here in Job 13 and 15. Says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him, but I will maintain my own ways before him. See, that's interesting. I definitely in the church, we hear that. Well, I've heard that a lot in the church. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. But Job adds in, he said, but I will maintain my own ways before him, whatever that means. The NIV version says, I will surely defend my ways to his face. Okay. 16 says, he also shall be my salvation, for an hypocrite shall not come before him. That's interesting. So that whole, though he slay me, yeah, will I trust him, but I will maintain my ways, my own ways before him. He also shall be my salvation, for an hypocrite shall not come before him. Okay, so then moving down, verses 20 and 21 stood out to me. It says, only do not two things unto me, then will I not hide myself from thee. Withdraw thine hand far from me, and let not thy dread make me afraid. Okay, so Job, then moving down in the chapter, Job asked God not to cut off the communication between him and God. So these are some good points here. And then from 23 down, it says, how many are mine iniquities and sins? Make me to know my transgression and my sin. Wherefore hidest thou thy face and holdest me for thine enemy? Wilt thou break a leaf driven to and fro, and wilt thou pursue the dry stubble? For thou writest bitter things against me, and makest me to possess the iniquities of my youth. Thou puttest my feet also in the stocks, and lookest narrowly unto all my paths. Thou settest a print unto the heels of my feet, and he as a rotten thing consumeth as a garment that is moth eaten. Okay, so my notes here. Job speaks of God's divinity. We as humans learn some dynamics of God and think that we are now smart, a lot of us, but it's a thought process that is very hard to try to think we have God figured out within just the human mind, within the knowledge that we have or the intellect that we have. I definitely like a lot of Job's prayer, especially in 20 and 21. Um, he tells him to withdraw thine hand. He said, only do not two things. So do not withdraw thy hand from me, and then don't let me to the basically to be afraid, like take away some of the terror, but don't leave me, but don't scare me this much, pretty much. Okay, so Job is definitely blaming God for his misfortunate situation and not the devil. Shouldn't he change the devil, and shouldn't he change the devil and say God allowed it? I don't know. Should he switch up and say God allowed it? But at the same time, I mean, it's like, dang, you know, hmm, that's a So I guess that's my question here. You know what I mean? Should Job switch it up and say, "Oh, he should be blaming the devil and just say that God allowed it, asking God why did he allow it. But no, he's saying these terrorists are coming from God. And that's what I have for 13.
No. If you look at, which I was listening to what we did last week or the week before last, and I actually talked about what was in 13 when I was supposed to be talking about what was in 12 when I talked about him talking about them having partiality with God. And I talked about how we do that now today, where because and the reason why we do it is because we not the biggest reason why we have partiality with God, when we'll make excuses for what God has done and stuff like that, or we'll say that, oh, God didn't do that, or God wouldn't do that, or whatever, is because God doesn't think like us. And we want to define what love is and what constitutes love. And we'll say, well, if a person loves you, they won't allow this to happen to you, or they won't allow that to happen to you, things of that sort. And so a lot of attributes of God is God does allow things to happen to us, and God does okay things to happen to us, and God does turn his hand against us in ways that we would not consider loving at all. I always point people back to Jesus Christ. That is his son. That is his whole son. And his son not only had the ability to defend himself, his father had complete ability to defend his son. He did not do such a thing. And he wouldn't allow his son to defend himself either. So these are things that we would not look at a loving father and say, this is how he would behave. And the reason why we would not look at a loving father and say, this is how he behaved, is because we don't know enough. We are working off of a limited amount of information. And that is what's happening with Job's friends. They have a very limited amount of information. And what we should be doing is humbling ourselves before God in prayer and questioning, okay, God, reveal to me, why is this happening? Which I say Job is guilty of too, to an extent. But he's not being partial with God. Because, like I said in the previous time we were on, if you look at the whole of at the very end of this whole conversation, God himself says that Job spoke right of him and his friends did not. So as you're reading through this whole thing, you have to consider that Job is speaking right of God and his friends are not speaking right of God. And then Job even warns them in this chapter. It says, what does he say? He says, if you, what does he say? It says, God, he said in 10, verse 10, he said, he will surely rebuke you if you secretly show partiality. He's saying this, even if you secretly show partiality to God, God will rebuke you. So he warns his friends in this moment that, hey, you guys are actually going to end up in a place where God about to put you in the streets because of the partiality that you're showing. And so God is light. There's no darkness in God. God is not sitting around trying to hide and sneak and do like God openly does things. I think Job just doesn't understand why he's openly doing this to him. And so he's kind of conflicted because he don't understand why. But he does understand that God is doing this. This is clearly the hand of God. There is no way you read the beginning and how it all starts out and not say, God's the one that brought this up. And then God clearly gives the permission. And then when God gave the permission, how was it viewed by God himself? The very second chapter, God himself says to Satan, you have caused me to stretch out my hand against him without any reason. So God is saying He struck Job for no reason. God himself is saying that. And so Job is telling his friends, God struck me for no reason. You see what I'm saying? So Job's words line up with God's words. You see, Job just wants a level of justice, which when God says it's for no reason, he's not necessarily meaning that it's for no reason. There was a reason behind it. It's just the reason was wrong, right? Because what was the reason? The reason was to pull out of Job his true feelings for God. And Satan says Job's true feelings for you is hatred if you remove his stuff. You see, if you strike Job, you're gonna find out his true feelings for you. You the God of light, right? Yeah. You reveal all things, right? Yeah. Well, what you haven't revealed Job's true feelings for you. You see, and Job's true feelings for you is he really don't like you. He only likes you for the stuff that you can do for him. That's it. Other than that, he could care less about you. And so the reason why God says it's for no reason is because you said that he was going to show that he doesn't like me. And that didn't happen. So what you saying was there really wasn't there. So you didn't prove your point. My point is proven. Job's an upright man. So what God is really saying is, I was right and you was wrong about Job. That's what he's saying when he says for no reason. Okay? And so Job is like, hey, I am an upright dude. You know, I made mistakes, but I've atoned. There's a process that I've used that God has given us to atone for the mistakes, and I've atoned for every mistake that I made. And I continuously atone. I even atone for the mistakes that I might have made that I don't know I made. I atone for the mistakes that my children might have made that I don't know that they made. And I'm also well aware that you can make a mistake in your heart, not even an outward mistake. And the mistakes that you make in your heart also have to be atoned for. That is deep, but it's true. It's so true. This is also a revelation that Jesus Christ gives us. He talks about if you lust after a woman in your heart, guilty. And so Job is on this. He's on this early. Before you hear about Jesus speaking of that, he's on this. And so with his friends, this is a moment where God is interacting with man in a way that's not familiar to man. Just because you're not familiar with it, and the men don't agree with it, and just because you don't agree with it, does not mean that you get to say that God's not doing this. You see, you still can say, hey, God, this is what's happening. Now, you may not understand it, and you can ask God, and I think this is the thing with Job. He just needs to ask God, okay, really, what's going on? Why is this happening? And not really getting at God like, yo, this dude needs to go to jail or something because of it. Which I don't even think he's really saying that. But he is talking out of some levels of aggravation, because I'm quite positive there is no way you're going to be sitting there dealing with boils all over your body and the aching pain that comes with that day and night, and not speak out of some level of aggravation. To me, Job is, I'm gonna jump off on a limb and say he's still hardcore, upright, righteous, and all of these different things, because I'm not sure I could have handled all of the things that he went through and not have to repent for cursing God at least once or twice throughout the process. And he, like, even in his horrible, I mean, this is a bad state to be in for anybody. He still can say in all boldness, which this is the line. I mean, we heard this line a million times, and it's worthy. It is so worthy to be preached. This line is so worthy to be preached. Though he slayed me, yet I still trust him. And this is something that I've learned, or I'm still learning, but I think it's highlighted. It was highlighted to me even more dealing with David, because like, one of the things I do is I try to study David's life, because God, the Bible says he's a man after God's own heart. So you really want to kind of pay attention to, like, okay, how does a man after God's own heart move, and what really makes him that? And one of the things that I think of that to me lines up with this is when God gives David three choices. Um, he gives him three choices of how he's going to pretty much destroy Israel or cause his calamity in Israel. He talks about him being pursued by his enemies. He talks about a famine, and he talks about plague. He says, David, choose one of the three. Which one do you want to go down? And David does not choose. The only thing he chose is the one that he didn't want to happen. He didn't choose which one he wanted to happen. He chose to trust God to choose which one he wanted to happen, because the famine would have to come from the hand of God, and the plague would also have to come from the hand of God. The only one that would come from the hand of man, which is what he requested not to happen, is the enemy chasing after him for a certain period of time, like 3 months or something. He only chose not to choose the enemy chasing after. He said, God, don't put me in the hands of men. He said, whatever you do, just leave me in your hands, because I trust you. Because there's mercy with you. There's grace with you. And what I'm learning from that, and what I'm learning from this moment in Job is, because one of the things that I struggled with originally, and I was praying to God over, was Revelations. Right? And in Revelations, you see John is crying because the seals are not being broken. And if you really don't slowly read that, because I read that several times and I was just like, oh man, I wish the seals would be broken. Yeah. And then when you actually pay attention to what happens when the seals are broken, you're like, hold on, wait a minute. This stuff's not good. Like, why was he crying that the seals weren't broken? Was as soon as every seal gets broken, some level of calamity, a chaos breaks out in the earth. And he was upset that the seals wasn't broken. He should have been happy that the seals wasn't broken. So I immediately, when I run into situations like that, that's very conflicting for me. When I read in the Bible, I go straight to prayer, because I'm just like, oh God, why is it that he was happy that the seals were being broken, but he was sad that the seals wasn't being broken, if he knew what it meant for the seals to be broken? And once the seals was broken, a lot of people died. Calamity just ran throughout the earth. Poverty went up. Everything that you probably wouldn't want to happen happens when the seals are broken. And so I'm asking God, like, God, help me with that. Help me with that thought process. And there's two things that you can draw from. Thing number one, and this is something that God really has started showing me recently, is we don't pay any attention to God except we experience his wrath. And God deserves to be paid attention to. He really does. And to me, as I feel now, which I didn't feel at that time, but I'm starting to understand, by any means necessary, we should acknowledge God. And I believe that's what because God is so worthy to be acknowledged. By any means necessary, he should be acknowledged. And when you really understand the scriptures, you really understand who God is as a creator, he deserves to be acknowledged by the things that he has created. He deserves to be worshiped by the things, and we will not worship him unless we are humbled. And the greatest and most easiest way to be humbled is to experience his wrath. Because for some strange reason, the way we are built up, if you are too nice to us, we will overlook you and dismiss you and consider ourselves to be our own saviors. And so that's step one. Step two, which is the most important step, which is the step that you see in David, which is the step that you see here in Job. And it's also a step that you see here if you go to Revelations in John, when he's crying about the seals not being up. God is trustworthy. even in his wrath. He is worthy to be trusted, even when everything seems like it's against you, even when you're dealing with plague, even when you're dealing with disease, even when you're dealing with dead loved ones. When complete destruction hits at the hand of God, God is still trustworthy. And the truth of the matter is, believers have to recognize that even in calamity, God is trustworthy. You see, and that's what Job sees. That's what David sees. That's what John sees. And if we're diligently seeking God, we can see it too. And so then you'll pray. You'll pray for the day of the Lord to come, knowing that that day is a destructive day. But it draws all hearts and minds back into God, back into recognizing that He is. And He's still a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So the beauty of God is if you choose to submit, if you choose to humble yourself, even in His wrath, He'll be gracious to you. He'll be gracious to you. God is extremely remarkable and extremely consistent. And Job understands that. So he's saying, even in all of this, I'm a trust him because he's trustworthy. And then he talks about him being his salvation. Christ is the salvation, even in God's wrath. I mean, when you understand and know that, there's a level of confidence that comes upon you, that you can endure the wrath of God. You know, you can endure the wrath of God if you know that He's trustworthy in His wrath. If you know you can cry out to Him still, and He's only going to go so far, because that's what David trusted. He trusted that God's only going to go so far. He's only going to strike out as much as needed and not more. One of the things that God had been dealing with me about us, and it's the reason why David didn't trust men, is because we do not know when to stop. And the reason why God is so trustworthy is because He knows exactly when to stop. We are not trustworthy. And we prove it all the time. We have no idea when to stop. We just keep going and going to our own destruction. We will run this place into the ground and it doesn't benefit us at all. It completely destroys us to run the place into the ground, and we'll still do it. It completely ruins our name to run the place into the ground, and we'll still do it. The beauty of God is even in His wrath, He knows exactly when to stop. Self-control is a beautiful thing, and it's only a trait that God has. That's all I have for 13. We go right into 14.
All right. So Job chapter 14. Okay. So Job chapter 14. And now Job is still speaking, and we get another quotable verse here. Says that man is born of a woman. Man that is born of a woman is a few days old and full of trouble. He said, man that is born of a woman is a few days old and full of trouble. Job says, for who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? No one. Okay. Job goes on to describe the frailty of men, that we all must die, etc., things of that nature. Move down to verse 12. It says, so man lieth down and riseth not till the heavens be no more. They shall not awake, nor be raised out of their sleep. Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave, that thou wouldest keep me secret until thy wrath be past, and thou wouldest appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come. Thou shalt call, and I will answer thee. Thou wilt have a desire to the work of thy hands. For now thou numberest my steps. Dost thou not watch over my sin? Okay. So here, okay, I'll come back to that. Let me finish off. So Job desires the grave and possibly thinks or questions about a life after death here. That's interesting. Job then continues or ends this chapter expressing God's wrath towards men. 19, he says, how thou destroyeth the hope of men. And then verse 20, he says, thou prevailest forever against him, and he passeth, thou changest his countenance and sendeth him away. His sons come to honor, and he knoweth it not, and they are brought low, but he perceiveth it not of them. But his flesh upon him shall have pain, and his soul within him shall mourn. Okay. So a few notes that stood out to me, a few things that stood out to me. Back to verse 4, he said, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Right? In verse 4. And he said, not one. Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? It says not one. And we understand that we're thankful for Christ, you know, who took the keys of life and death and things of that nature. So we're thankful for that. You know, we're thankful for restoration. And we're thankful for him being our mediator to the Father. Very much thankful for that. And then back to this thought process of you get into the middle of the chapter in between, and it sounds like I said, is he informing or is he inferring that men will rise after or around the time of the new heaven? Oh, man, he said, so man lieth down and riseth not till the heavens be no more. They shall not awake nor be raised out of their sleep. Very interesting in his choice of words here, comparing, I believe that he's comparing death to sleep, which we understand well. Okay, that kind of has been expressed in the Old Testament before. That makes me think of Solomon calling the prophet through the witch or the source, whatever, through witchcraft and out of his sleep. And the prophet told him, like, why did you wake me? So maybe that was kind of understood. But it seems like, I don't know, through this language, I'm not sure if Job understands the coming of Christ. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, again, so then he goes on to describe the grave and possibly, I'm not sure, was he, that's a question I have. Was he questioning a life after death? Yeah. So that's all I have for 14.
Yes, yes, he did. Now, I can only assume, but the way he's speaking, it clearly seems like he does understand and know. Like he's continuously saying, "Hey, we're gonna rise again eventually." Like he even gives a biblical time. Like the Bible talks about there being a new heaven and a new earth, but he's saying about the heaven and the earth passing away, and man is gonna lay in rest until the heavens and earth pass away. I mean, did he just say heavens or he say heavens? Okay, I said the earth. He just said heavens, but the heavens are no more. He says that. So Job has some insight. Like I even talked about in the last chapter, how he speaks on making sacrifices for sins that people made in their heart. Now, this is not something that you find in the law of Moses, even though arguably Job is before the law of Moses. But this is not something that you find in the law of Moses, talking about sins of the heart, sins is done in the heart. The law of Moses is all outward sins. it has nothing to do with the things that's going on inward. And Jesus highlights that. Let me not say that because it says it talks about coveting your neighbor's wife. Although, yeah, that would be an inward sin. Okay, so vast majority of the law of Moses only covers outward sins. uh, so I still think that this is very unique because even though there are some parts of the law of Moses, which I have to correct myself, that does cover inward sins. You do still see here that men didn't even really necessarily interpret it that way. You'll even see it right now today that, those who still keep the law of Moses, they think that it mainly highlights, and to the degree this is not a false thing, it does mainly highlights outward sins, things that you're already committing. Because when Jesus talks about sinning against your brother, calling him names, that's outward. That's more outward. Yeah, the law of Moses it does strike more outward than inward, but there are some inward in there, so we have to make that statement. So I'm sitting here battling with myself what I'm going to say right now. You should always do this off camera. It doesn't look good. It's on camera, but whatever. I still think this is more of an advanced way of thinking because you see it in the scriptures that they really were more concerned with how they looked outwardly. And I can confidently say this part. I found what I can confidently say without any having to correct myself because Jesus clearly says this. The Pharisees kept doing outward things, the way they would fast and things of that sort, the way they would pray. And then Jesus would say, hey, don't fast the way they fast because they care about outward appearance and they care about outward praise. Don't pray the way they pray because they care about outward appearance and praise. Pray in a way that shows you care more about your relationship with God, which is an inward secret thing. You see, even let your thoughts come out in a way that you consider that God is there with you in your imagination. Consider God in all these things. And Job has that insight. And seeing that he has that insight, that means he's probably dwelling with God in that place. Because where else could you dwell with God? You cannot outwardly dwell with God. You can't. And if you can't outwardly dwell with God, then the outward things that you do for God are not as important as the inward things. You see, because that's where God meets you. God does not meet you outwardly when it comes to your relationship. You see, he does show that you have a relationship with him outwardly. And that's what it says. If you do these things in secret, he will reward you openly. He openly shows that you have a relationship with him. But that's if you honestly cherish the relationship you have with God, you would spend private time with him. And you would be more concerned with the private time that you have with him than you would be concerned with openly displaying yourself in front of me. And so he has this insight. He clearly has this insight. Like everything that he's saying, I want to say from 12, maybe not even 12, from they're in there from 7. Maybe 6. Most of the chapter, let's say that. Like at least almost half the chapter, almost. Certain period of this chapter to about dang it, I don't know. It's a lot that's kind of hinting at him understanding that not only They're not only are there some hints that he understands some things about Jesus Christ, but to me, he most definitely hinting that he understands some things about a resurrection and how God is dealing with the earth until. And I think maybe there is especially in the beginning when you see Genesis, there is a hope in the hearts and minds. It seems like of all the men that there's going to be some level of resurrection. You see it more clear when the New Testament kind of highlights Abraham and what Abraham's mind was when he was willing to sacrifice his son. And you don't see it in the Old Testament. The Old Testament doesn't necessarily highlight it, but in the New Testament, we have to trust that these men, if you believe in the Bible, you believe in God, you trust that these men were in tune with revelation and God revealing to them the mindset of the people in the Old Testament, or what's being written in the Old Testament. And they say that Abraham was willing to kill his son because in his mind, God was going to resurrect him. So there was a level of understanding that there is going to be a resurrection. And another thing, I believe, and this is just me winging the mess out of this based upon what I've read, that when Abraham purchased the land that he was burying his family at, I think he purchased that land for a specific reason, because I feel like he thinks this is the place. Number one, I think he had an insight where he knew God was going to put his name there. There was something more special about this place than any other place. And if you look at the scriptures, there's something more special about that place than any other place on the earth. It really is, because that is the place where God chose to put his name. Not only that, God would not tolerate, especially at that time, before Christ, God would only tolerate so much sin being executed in that area before he cleanses the area. This is the reason why Israel got in there, is because the Canaanites, the people who were there, had sinned against God so much that he was just like, forget it. I'm cleansing the area. You guys, everybody's getting wiped out. It's a wrap for this whole area. Everything and everybody got to go. And so that was that, right? Then Israel gets in there. And Israel starts practicing some of the same practices. And what does God do? He does another cleanse. He cleanses the areas again. And then when Israel gets carried out of there and other people get brought in, what happens? They start getting attacked by lions and stuff. And they had to come in and start showing them some of the ways of God in order for them to live in the land. So this area where Abraham is in, and he has his family buried in, he buys the plot of land. This area is special to God. You see, and there's a lot of signs that it is, and those, I believe those men. I mean, I don't have to believe it. The Bible says those men had a idea or a mindset toward the resurrection when dealing with that, and that's in Genesis also. Now, it's a more of a difficult thing to tell you exactly where Job is in the timeline, but he's clearly. I'm gonna say this. I think he's closer to between. I don't know whether he's before the flood or after the flood, but I almost feel like he's before the flood. That's my feelings to it. That he's before the flood, not necessarily after the flood. Because one of the things that kind of made me feel like he's before the flood, not necessarily after the flood, is something I think that's going to be talked about in the next chapter. I think. So I want to not say it until we get to the next chapter, which we won't be doing today, because we're getting closer to the time when we need to get ready for service. But in this one, in 14, I just want to go through my notes real quick and make sure I said everything that I did want to say. Let's see. Set a point in time. Yeah, it talks about setting a point in time to his wrath is past, hide him in the grave. So he is most definitely desiring death because I guess he feels like, which I mean, death can be a thing that is used to keep you from seeing calamity. You see that all through the scriptures where God will say, "Hey, I'm going to cause all of this calamity to happen, but I won't do it in your time. I'll do it after you die." And then several key that is said to several kings in the scriptures, and then they'll be like, "Oh well, at least I don't have to see it or endure it during my time in the earth. He'll give me peace during my time in the earth." I think sometimes I'll be thinking like that's that's a that's a I understand the sentiments of that and I agree with the sentiments of that, but I still would be like thinking like, dang man, but my kids gonna have to deal with that. Like I guess part of me like feel like I would rather deal with stuff and then pass it. I would rather deal with drama and then not pass drama on to my kids. Is it a blessing that I don't have to deal with drama? Yes. So I can clearly, you can clearly say that, look at that legitimately and say that. But does it kind of suck that for sure while you're alive that your kids are going to have to deal with drama? I think, yeah, that sucks. But I mean, I guess you can have a conversation with your children at that point, seeing that God has given you the insight on that and say, hey, yo, be prepared for the drama that is to come. Be prayed up for the drama that is to come. But yeah, we see that does happen. Death is a thing that kind of keeps us from experiencing the wrath of God to an extent, which I'm not necessarily against that because the wrath of God, although I feel like believers should be prepared for it. I mean, if God was to give me a choice that I would still be in His good grace and I didn't have to experience His wrath, I'd go for it. I'd go for it all day long because I mean, who really wants to deal with the wrath of the Creator of all things? Like God's mind is so vast that it's like He could think up some very interesting ways uh, to, to punish people for you know, or to humble people. Like the things that he has the ability to conjure up is literally beyond our understanding because there's so many things in the earth right now that God has created that we haven't discovered yet. Because of how creative he is. You think about all of the different like little bugs that we would see as completely and utterly pointless. That you can't see, that's just constantly in the middle of the earth. Um, that is a intricate, detailed, creative mind. The things that he could conjure up when angry. I don't know that I want to experience because it's like I don't understand what the thought process of people in at times, and I'm kind of rambling now, but I'm about to cut it off. The thought process of people who are like claim to be atheists and things of that sort, and they say, uh, if I meet God, I'm gonna have something to say to him. Like, bruh, I don't think you know what it means to meet God. Like, if you honestly think you're gonna stand before God and just be a tough guy, and you can't really stand before some of the people on the earth and be tough in front of them, I don't think you recognize how terrifying meeting God would be. But uh, human beings are fairly arrogant. So, as I say, that's all. That's all for today. I done rambled enough. As I say, pray for me, pray for the channel, pray for everybody you see on the channel. And as we come to understand and know who you are, we most definitely will be praying for you. God bless you and keep you.